Kia ora. Welcome to August Family History Month 2020 digitally at Rotorua Library. As part of our in-library Family History Month program, we were going to host Madison Pine from the Auckland War Memorial Museum. We're very pleased to be able to share Madison's presentation with you online. Madison is one of the collection technicians and research support team members for the online Cenotaph. She works alongside researchers and family historians to discover service people's war service stories and experiences. You can access the online Cenotaph from your personal device or from within the library. To access from the library homepage, click on eLibrary. Click Online Databases. Navigate to the heading Military and click on Auckland War Memorial Museum Cenotaph Database. Madison is now going to share how you can use online Cenotaph to search for military family history and demonstrate how you can contribute your own family history to the database. And here is Madison Pine.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Madison aho. Ka tamaki paingahira aho e mahi ana. Hello everybody, my name is Madison Pine. I grew up in Rotorua and then later moved to Hamilton, where I studied at the University of Waikato. I now live in Auckland, where I work at the Auckland War Memorial Museum as a part of the Collection Information and Access team. I'm one of the people who look after the online Cenotaph database, which is for all of those who have served for New Zealand. Today I've been asked to share a bit about online Cenotaph, so I'm going to talk about how online Cenotaph came to be before moving on to the database itself, some of the features we have, sharing how online Cenotaph has been used to connect people, and how it can be used for research and sharing the stories of our loved ones. Online Cenotaph has a home at Auckland War Memorial Museum. Auckland Museum, New Zealand's first museum, was formed in October 1852. The museum began its life in central Auckland in a 2-bedroom farm cottage in Grafton. One room for the collections and one for the curator. It quickly outgrew the small cottage and relocated to the Provincial Council building, in 1867. The same year, the Auckland Institute was formed. And the following year, the Institute took over the management of the museum. Once again, the museum outgrew its premises and moved into the old post office building in Princess Street before moving into the first custom-built premises on Princess Street along the road in 1876. It was here that the museum and its collections flourished. Throughout the First World War, the museum remained at this site. However, with the growing collections, another move was on the horizon. Auckland War Memorial Museum, located in Pukekawa, was built by a community of Auckland and New Zealand as a place to remember the 18,000 New Zealanders who lost their lives during the First World War. A competition was held for the design of the new war memorial, which was funded by the Institute for British Architects. A £1,000 prize drew over 70 entries, with Auckland architectural firm Grierson, Amer and Draffin winning the competition. Malcolm Draffin, Hugh Grierson and Kenneth Amer all served during the First World War. Draffin served with the New Zealand Engineers at Gallipoli and Passchendaele, where he was awarded the Military Cross for acts of gallantry. Amer served with the 2nd Auckland Infantry Battalion and was also at the Battle of Passchendaele, where he was wounded and invalided back to New Zealand. Grierson served with the New Zealand Rifle Brigade. Both Grierson and Amer had brothers who died during the war. The new museum and what it was to recognise would have been very close to their hearts. From the beginning, the Auckland War Memorial Museum was going to be a place where people could come to remember their loved ones. New Zealand sent more men to fight in the First World War per head of population than any other nation. Over 18,000 New Zealanders died from a country of, at the time, only 1 million. Grieving for their loved ones was made more difficult for New Zealand families, as nearly all those who were killed were buried overseas. Almost a third of those have no known grave and are remembered in memorials throughout New Zealand. Many families had nowhere to focus their grief and say goodbye to their loved ones. War memorials were then built all over the country and acted as symbolic graveyards for families and became places of remembrance on Anzac Day. After the Second World War, the memorials were added to again, and the Auckland War Memorial Museum was expanded by Malcolm Keith Draffin, one of the original architects, and his son. As a part of the expansion, a hall of memories for those who served in Auckland's Second World War was added, with the names of 4,000 New Zealanders from the Auckland province. Later, the Hall of Memories was amended to include those that died in later conflicts: Korea, Malaya, Borneo, Vietnam, Bosnia, Kuwait, East Timor, and Afghanistan. These differ from the other memorials as they are memorials for all New Zealanders. Bringing us to online Cenotaph. As a part of the museum's role as a living war memorial, online Cenotaph was developed in 1966. My role works directly with the online Cenotaph database, helping to develop and enhance it, adding information, helping with research and inquiries, creating new records, creating new data sets, writing articles, connecting with families and friends of service persons from all conflicts. Online Cenotaph is a living memorial for all those that have served for Aotearoa on active service. It began in 1996 as a volunteer project in the old Armoury Information Centre, which you can see here, and was redeveloped in 2012 in collaboration with the Ministry of Cultural and Heritage to coincide with the centenary of the First World War. At this stage, the database had a record for every New Zealand soldier from the First World War. Today, Online Cenotaph has over 235,000 records online. These include all of those that served in the First World War, Second World War, and later conflicts such as J-Force, Korea, Vietnam, Malaya, Borneo, Afghanistan, and many peacekeeping operations as well. It is also not just a database for those that have passed away. There are many living service personnel who are listed on Online Cenotaph, and they are welcome to add information and contribute to their own records as well. Online Cenotaph does have an inclusion criteria, which is to have operational service for which they have received medallic recognition, and to be a New Zealander, either born here or serving for New Zealand. We are always happy to have a chat with people if they're unsure, and we do have many exceptions to this criteria. For example, we include many of the volunteer aid detachments from the First World War. Coast watchers who served in the Pacific Islands are also included on Online Cenotaph, even though they never officially attested into the Defence Force. And we also have many merchant Navy servicemen who served in both the Second World War and the First World War. The majority of our records have, however, come from the First and the Second World War nominal rolls, which means that most of those on Online Cenotaph are likely to be Army from those two conflicts. But, of course, those who served in other conflicts and in other forces are also included. After the WW100 commemorations, Online Cenotaph shifted its focus to post-1945 conflicts, We chose post-1945 conflicts because we are aware that there are many veterans that are still alive and who are able and hopefully willing to share some of their stories and experiences. After the Second World War, as all military engagements New Zealand was involved in were carried out by volunteers rather than conscripts, their service being voluntary has often been overlooked, and many feel as though that their service has been forgotten. As a part of our shift in focus, my colleague Dan moved to Wellington, where he now works with the New Zealand Archives and the New Zealand Defence Force to help find documents that relate to those that served in these later conflicts. These records are also not fully complete, so if you know somebody who should be on online Cenotaph but isn't, we're more than welcome to get in contact with us and we can create a record for them. So for those that are online Cenotaph, there are many features that could be helpful for research. We have the database itself, but we also have many other search functions and features, which I'm just going to talk a little bit about. So the first one is the browse function. The browse is where you can search by places, war, conflict, voyages, and family name. So these are some of the conflicts that we have on online Cenotaph. The voyages function is also fairly popular for people who are researching embarkation ships. This does mostly relate to those from the First World War, as we have most of that information online. But you are also able to build a custom search with the custom search function. So say I wanted to find all of the people who served in the First World War with a connection to Rotorua. First of all, I would add the war, and then I would select a place. So for place, Rotorua had just over 500 results. But if I switched it up to, instead of being place keyword, Rotorua came up with about 760 matches. So when using the custom search function, it can be helpful to try a few different search terms and keywords, mostly because how this searches relates to what information is in our back-end database. So for the place name, not everybody would have had Rotorua as a specific place in the back-end database. Then earlier this year, we launched our popular searches page, which was a way to collate some of our research and data projects. These are based off various research projects and information that has often come from the museum's documentary heritage collection. There are some really interesting data sets that we've created here, and one of these I find is the Māori Pioneer Battalion Tunnelers. In December 1916, 43 members of the Pioneer Battalion were sent to assist the New Zealand Tunnelers in the lead up to the Battle of Arras. The New Zealand Tunnelers had developed the cabins underneath the city of Arras and prepared 12 miles of tunnels which linked the cabins together. This allowed the troops to get close to enemy trenches before emerging to charge them. The cabins dated back to the 17th century and could shelter around 20,000 men. They had running water, electric lights, kitchens, latrines, a light rail system, and a hospital. And many of the tunnels were named after the New Zealand cities and towns such as Christchurch, Blenheim, Wellington, and Auckland. You can see here on the map some of the names. So from very top, Russell, to the very bottom, Janet Bluff. It was Sue Baker Wilson of Waihi who was determined that these men would no longer be called the Forgotten 43 and researched many of these tunnelers, reading through hundreds of personnel files to identify them. She identified about 39 of them, which we've included here on the popular searches page. But if you do know of any other Māori Pioneer Battalion member tunnelers, please let us know and we can add them to the data set as well. We do also have a couple of interesting other ones. One of my favourites is the Goldfish Club, which is airmen who bailed out over water and were saved either by a dinghy or a Mae West, and they became eligible for the Goldfish Club. So these data sets do range from small to large and include various different types of research. So if you know of any others that you'd like to see included here, please let us know. Cenotaph Stories is a home for our longer articles on service people. Researchers can narrow down by what topic they're interested in or just simply scroll through the list. We have articles written by prominent New Zealand historians, many of whom have sent us articles and thought-provoking pieces over Anzac Day this year. And often many of these have been researched ourselves. So one of these is the 75th anniversary of VJ Day. My colleague Dan and I put this one together, which looks at each forces, so the Air Force, Navy, Army, in the war in the Pacific, and highlights some of their individual stories. We were very lucky to be able to use some of the lovely images, which have popped up here as well, from the Greg Moyle collection, which is on loan to the museum. So Cenotaph Stories is also a really lovely way for us to be able to connect with and share some of our collection highlights from the wider museum as well. It is also a place for reflection and learning more about people's histories. It's a place for commemoration. We recently celebrated Cook Islands Language Week, and we had a lovely researcher, Willie Covers, from the Cook Islands, write a piece celebrating Māori Kukiarani and linking back to the services family in the islands. So there are lots of interesting features on Online Cenotaph, and I hope you'll all have a look at some of them if you're interested. However, Online Cenotaph is primarily a biographical database. We have about 235,000 records, which does change daily when we create new records. The majority of the records on Online Cenotaph have been built up over about 25 years or so, with the majority of information coming from military records such as the nominal roles and personnel files, which is what we call our source data. But we do also have photographs, publications, newspaper articles, inferior and unique materials such as troopship magazines, which have all contributed to their records as well. However, one of the most special parts of Online Cenotaph is the information that has been contributed by families, friends, and researchers, which is what we call user-generated content. These lovely photographs here have been contributed to Online Cenotaph by their loved ones. So Cenotaph is unique in that on every single record, you are able to contribute information on that person's service and life. They can add information to their biographical information, such as dates of birth and dates of death, who their parents were, whether they had siblings or other relatives, add photographs and family histories. You can lay a poppy in remembrance or leave a note to your loved one as well. Often researchers will add detailed information on their service, deciphering personnel files and finding out about campaigns and promotions, transfers, and whether their what their relative service conduct was like, whether they were honoured with medals or whether they were sent off with field punishment number 2. It is our researchers and our contributors who are absolutely invaluable to Online Cenotaph. As a team of currently 3, there isn't a feasible way that would be able to research each of those people on Cenotaph. So we are also not the knowledge holders of these stories. It is the families and the friends and those who served alongside who are the ones that hold these precious memories and stories, anecdotes and letters and diaries and cherished photographs. And they are the ones that are able to give us a glimpse into the lives of those who served and remember them and their sacrifices and cherish their memories. Another interesting feature of Cenotaph is the notes section. So we had a lot of lovely notes left on Cenotaph over Anzac Day this year while we were all in lockdown. Kerry, who wrote a very beautiful tribute to her father, and we also have some really beautiful notes that have just been written on online Cenotaph by family members just in the past month of July. So this one from Patricia, in memory of my dad, Lynn Kearns, always remembered with a smile. So they're very just beautiful. Leaving a note on online Cenotaph is an act of remembrance. It's sharing your memories and your stories of your loved ones. It was military historian Christopher Pugsley who touched on the impact of stories when he described the sacrifice of those in the First World War. Whatever we do, in a way, we're only scratching the surface. And if you think of 100,000 New Zealanders who went to war, there's 100,000 stories. Online Cenotaph, with over 235,000 records, is consistently adding information, and we're always trying to find more stories to share of those service personnel. So I've asked myself, how can we learn more about those who have served using online Cenotaph as a research base? So let's start with the record for Francis Oscar Burtt. Most of our information, which you see here, has come from the nominal roll. So we know that he was a teacher living in Rotorua at 16 King Street, married to Mrs. M.J. Burtt, who was at the same address, and his next of kin. From the nominal roll, we also have some embarkation details. We know that he was a captain with the infantry reinforcements as a part of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force, which doesn't really tell us much about his service on its own. We don't know what battalion he served with or which campaigns he was involved in, but it does give us a starting point, so it confirms that he embarked overseas and with the army during the Second World War. However, Francis does appear in 2 other records on New Zealand held by Auckland Museum's Documentary Heritage Collection. The first is the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force Prisoners of War, which was compiled by Ralph Barker. This has his service number, his rank, his name, his surname, his initials, unit, and approximate date or place of capture. And so we have added this information under prisoner of war. And there was another one as well, which is the German and Germany occupied territories imperial prisoners of war list. And this gives us the information on which camp he was in and his prisoner of war number. So with these 2 documents, we are able to piece together a little bit more about his service. And while we're always adding information from official service and working on adding information to online Cenotaph records, we do also love to work with family historians, researchers, and enthusiasts to contribute to Cenotaph as well. Over the last couple of years here in New Zealand, we have been very fortunate that we have a large digitisation effort, and many of our information is available to us online for free. So using some of the websites that we often use for online Cenotaph, I've undertaken some research to find out what I can about Captain Francis Oscar Burtt. We often get questions about whether or not we're able to shed any light on a person's military service. And while the most helpful piece of information for this research is the personnel file, For the Second World War, these are held by the New Zealand Defence Force. So for my research on Francis Oscar Burtt, I've mostly used publicly available sources to find the majority of this information. One of our most common questions is whether or not we're able to find photographs, and these can sometimes be a little bit tricky to find, but I was able to find a photograph for Francis from the Auckland Weekly News, from Heritage Images. There it is. And this is some other information that I was able to find as well. So Francis was married in September 1931 to Mabel Janet McLean of Nelson, and they were married at the Presbyterian Church in Nelson, which is just there on the screen as well. He was the eldest son of Mr. and Mrs. John Burtt, and originally from Spraydon, Christchurch. So this information has come from Papers Past, and there are various tricks to searching on Papers Past. I always find it's helpful to start with a full name search and then also trying initials and last name searches as well, as you'll often come up with different results. And this is also some other information that he received a Bachelor of Arts from the Canterbury University College. And I was also able to find a bit of information that traced some of the events during the Second World War. So he was listed as missing in the Auckland Star in January 1942, and then later confirmed a prisoner of war later on in January in the Auckland Star. I was also able to find some other information using an initial search. So there was a list of volunteers from the Pairoa district. There's some information about his transfer from Camp 47 in Italy to Germany in November 1943. There's also this broadcast message from Mr. Harold Denny, a war correspondent who gave a report on life in an Italian camp, and he mentioned Francis Burtt and sort of described a little bit about what camp life was like. He wrote, "To occupy their time, the New Zealanders had made use of the talents or special training of individual men and had formed lecture or study groups. Thus, an engineer gave lectures to others on engineering and an architect on architecture." And this captures a lot of the learning that was done in camp. But he also wrote about how when he first arrived, it was the middle of winter, that there wasn't very much food, and how the men suffered very greatly from the cold. There are also a couple of images of the camp that were painted by James Herbert Golding Alp and were contributed to online Cenotaph by his daughter Barbara. So this is of Campo P.G 47, which was an officers' camp in Modena, Italy. They are also able to give us a little bit of a glimpse about what life was like. So this first one is of the railway entrance, and the second one says, "Stone walls do not a person make. Italy, February 1943. And so I have a few more of his paintings that I thought I would share on online Cenotaph that have been contributed, but we have also put together an article that was written by his daughter if you're interested in learning a little bit more about James Alp as well. So this was based on a drawing from Christmas Day in 1942. I always thought that this was quite interesting because for many of the soldiers it would have been one of their first winter Christmases. And they sort of celebrated by putting together a concert of Cinderella on Christmas Day. And I thought that this was really interesting. They've got a list of cast members, and James Alp had many of them sign the program, including Oscar Burtt, who's also known as Franz Oscar Burtt, who served as part of the choir on Christmas 1942. I just thought that this was a really interesting connection, that was only found because James's daughter was able to contribute these paintings to his record. So we do also know that then around 1943, Francis Burtt was transferred to a camp in Germany. This would have most likely been because of the Italian armistice, and the circumstances at each of these camps differed quite greatly. Some were deserted by guards entirely. At one camp, the prisoners were warned by civilians that the Germans were near and able to escape. However, for many, escape was not possible, and they were taken to German camps. So we know that Francis was then taken to Oflag 8F, and which was based at Marisch Trubau. But in April 1944, the prisoners were then transferred to Oflag 79 near Brunswick, and the camp was closed. And I believe that this is where he spent the remainder of his time as a prisoner of war. It wasn't until April 1945 that Burtt was reported safe in the UK, and then he arrived in Wellington around September 1945 before he travelled back to Rotorua. And so while we don't know the full experience of his as a prisoner of war, this research does sort of give us an idea. We can sort of piece together by finding images of the camps and learn a little bit about what was happening there, what was being reported, but it is hard to know about the day-to-day detail. Those experiences may have only been shared by close family, but also often they were never shared at all, which is again why we value family researchers and those who are able to share the more in-depth stories and experiences of those who served during the war. Another incredibly helpful research tool is, of course, the Archives New Zealand. Archives is basically your first stop if you're doing research on the First World War, as they do hold all of the personnel files for those that served in the First World War. You can also find the personnel files on the online Cenotaph records right at the bottom of the page. But it is the archive's mission to preserve the nation's memory. So often we can find a couple of gems in here, though they're not always digitized. For Francis, I found a Canterbury Education Board salary card and also his probate, which was able to shed a little bit of light about his family. So he was, I found out about his brother, John Keith Burtt, a chartered accountant, and his nephew, Richard Thomas Keith Burtt, a solicitor. They were appointed his executors and trustees. Again, his wife was named, as was his daughter, Patricia Ann Miller. And so we do also know that he passed away on the 31st of May in 1977 in Auckland. I was then able to find his date of birth, so the 22nd of March 1906, and his parents' name, Edith Clara and John Burtt. And I sort of wanted to know whether or not they had any other children. So I was able to find Francis Oscar, who was born in 1906, his brother John Keith, born in 1907, Noel Vincent, born in 1911, and Thomas Browning, who was born in 1915 and was coincidentally a New Zealand cricketer. It was his two younger brothers, John Keith and Noel Vincent Burtt, who also served during the Second World War. To search a little bit more about his post-war life, I did come across this wonderful photograph here of the Shannon School staff in 1947 to 1950. where he was the principal, who's the school headmaster at Shannon School. And so this comes from the Hura Historical Society, and I was able to find it by Digital New Zealand, which is another of New Zealand's databases. And it brings together many of our national archives and national archives, like papers passed, online cenotaph. There's information from Te Papa, the National Archives, the National Library. So it's also a really valuable research tool. So then I've added all of my contributions to online cenotaph, and this is what his record looks like now. So much, it's got a bit more fuller, and it definitely tells us a little bit more about his story and where he was taken prisoner of war and that sort of thing. So one of the aims of online cenotaph is to have personal photographs and memories and stories sitting alongside the public archives and official documents like the nominal roll. We absolutely love to work with researchers and family members, and are always happy to answer your questions or assist you with your research queries where we can. Francis Oscar Burtt is, of course, just an example of how you can use online cenotaph as a starting point for research. What I was able to find is just information that's available online. Friends and families and researchers, those who are close with service personnel, are able to find infinitely more information in detail, and are able to share their stories. Online cenotaph is a place that we hope people can come together to learn about the stories and experiences of those who've served for New Zealand. It's a place where people are able to connect and to remember and to commemorate. I hope that you've all learned something interesting about online cenotaph today, and I hope that maybe I've even inspired you to do some research and contribute to your own family members' cenotaph records. Ko mau mahara tonui kato ki rātou. We will remember them.
Thank you, Madison. Remember, our staff here at Rotorua Library are available to assist you with navigating this excellent resource. Thank you.